Embryo Adoption, Part 2 with Dr. Elizabeth Rex. Today on The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong, chaste heart of St. Joseph. I'm your host, Jim Havens, and our guest today is Dr. Elizabeth Rex. She is a Catholic wife and mother, a Catholic bioethicist, and the president of the Donum Vitae Institute, donumvitaeinstitute.org. Dr. Elizabeth Rex, welcome back to The Simple Truth. How are you today?
I'm great, and thank you for inviting me back.
Absolutely, yes. When we had you on last, it was for a Testimony Tuesday, so I do recommend people go back and listen to that, learn more about Dr. Rex's background. Fascinating story that she shared with us leading into her good work, and we got a little introduction into that good work, specifically her education that she is helping people to understand more about embryo adoption, which we're going to talk about today in a fuller treatment. And so there's a lot here, and so we're going to try to get in as much as possible with Dr. Elizabeth Rex today. And first, I guess I just wanted to start by laying out the landscape of what we're talking about with respect to what is occurring in our time with respect to in vitro fertilization, IVF. We have a study I'm holding in my hand right here from 2023, talking about the year 2023. It says that more children are now dying from the IVF process than are dying from abortion in the U.S., and that's saying that in 2023, 2 million human embryos did not survive to be implanted from IVF, and another 2 million from IVF were either frozen, destroyed, or donated to research. So we're talking about 4 million children in 1 year that are being treated in ways that they are not to be treated in, terrible ways here, treated like things to be discarded or used rather than human beings to be loved. 4 million in 1 year. And that shouldn't, one is too many, but we're talking about this on a much vaster scale than that we really need to try to understand. And then also, in that same time, in 1 year, about 96,000 babies were born using IVF. So just remember that when you hear people like President Donald Trump, politicians like Trump, to even Mike Pence talk about IVF being pro-life, just understand the vast destruction that's taking place. 4 million children in 1 year destroyed or frozen versus 96,000 children being conceived in this artificial way and then being born. That's what we're talking about here. We're in this time of this high-tech barbarism, and it's resulted in, right now, the current landscape that I understand, the numbers that I see, are that we've got 1.5 million frozen embryos in the U.S. alone, 10 million frozen embryos worldwide, and that number is growing every day. This is a massive problem. When we say human embryos, understand what we're talking about. We're talking about human beings at an early level of development. We were all that size once, and again, this is not right. This needs to stop. This needs to end. And what about this ethical dilemma? What do we do with those who are already conceived in this way, that are there, they exist, they're frozen, millions of them, and what are we to do? So Dr. Elizabeth Rex is here to talk about the side of embryo adoption as one possible solution, and just to understand there's a debate going on here, right? There's a current debate with all of this, and that's what we want to kind of kick around here today. What are the facts of this debate, and how are we to look at this? Obviously, everybody wants to understand what the church teaches on this, and so that's where I'd like to begin with this today, Dr. Rex, is that just to kind of get a handle on what church teaching is it fair to say the following, that Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, the encyclical 1995 Pope St. John Paul II, it does not mention embryo adoption specifically, but it does condemn IVF related embryo destruction. Then we have Dignitas Personae, the 2008 document from the Congregation of for the Doctrine of Faith under Pope Benedict XVI. in that it does discuss embryo adoption more directly, acknowledging a moral complexity and somewhat cautioning against it, it seems here, due to potential violations of church teaching on the procreative meaning of marriage. But the CDF notes that there's no clear moral solution currently proposed that would avoid all ethical problems, and it stops short of explicitly condemning embryo adoption, but it also doesn't endorse it, thus leaving it open to current debate. Is that a fair way to see it, that it's currently open to debate, that's where we're at, and you're here to present one side of that debate? How do you view it?
Jim, there are good moral theologians on both sides of this issue, but I like to begin by stating that when Dignitas Personae was finally released on December 12th, 2008, at the official Vatican press conference with Catholic News Agency, Pope Benedict asked the president of the Pontifical Academy for Life, Monsignor Rino Fisichella, to summarize the issue that was, I think everyone was hoping the church would resolve. But the statement was from the Vatican, and it was also seconded by the USCCB, is that it remains an open discussion. And that, in fact, the Vatican and Dignitas Personae had not ruled out the practice. That's a pretty strong statement. If it had been immoral, if it had been illicit, if it had been unacceptable, that both Donum Vitae, Evangelium Vitae, and Dignitas Personae were not shy about condemning IVF and heterologous artificial fertilization, heterologous artificial insemination, also homologous artificial fertilization and homologous insemination, and surrogacy, in which a surrogate mother is impregnated with either an embryo or she is inseminated and uses her own ovum and then agrees to release the baby once it's born to the people who paid her to gestate the baby. So that is not embryo adoption. And all of those practices were, as well as freezing, which was heavily condemned. Donum Vitae went from about one paragraph condemning cryopreservation to 6 paragraphs condemning cryopreservation in Dignitas Personae because it harms and kills embryos. And it specifically states that it deprives embryos of maternal reception and gestation. That's one of the primary reasons freezing was condemned, harming, killing, and preventing maternal reception, shelter, care, and gestation. So clearly the church is all in favor of having these embryos, once they've been conceived, they must be transferred. The problem happens when they're not transferred and they're frozen and the parents don't come back for them. And in fact, the document, Dignitas Personae, number 18, laments the fact that hundreds of thousands of embryos are orphans. It calls them orphans. And it states that their parents did not return for them to transfer them to the mother's womb. In fact, all trace of the parents has been lost. So they are indeed orphans. And Dignitas Personae, actually, when it goes through all the things you cannot do with frozen embryos, like give them to research, experimentation, to keep them frozen indefinitely, the church condemns even freezing temporarily is condemned, let alone indefinitely until they die of freezer burn or decay. And it also condemns using donor or frozen embryos as a treatment for infertility for infertile couples. And this paragraph has been recently, in fact, this past year, heavily cited as a condemnation of embryo adoption, but it is not. It is actually condemning something that many of your listeners may have heard about. It's very controversial and it's very bad. It destroys donor embryos in a 3-parent IVF procedure where a donor embryo is either created or taken from the freezer and is actually is destroyed in the process to replace mitochondrial disease in the couple's own IVF embryo. So they replace the nuclei, they put it in the healthy embryo. It's really terrible. Yeah. And the church rightly condemns it. Right. But then it says, but what about prenatal adoption? And it praises it. So we'll talk about that in more detail.
Well, yeah, we will get to that when we get back. But yeah, the church very clearly, what we can say 100% in church teaching, very clearly condemns all IVF, just like it clearly condemns all abortion. And so, yeah, there's no room for this. What the question is here, what we're talking about is not the condemnation of IVF, but when people do it anyway, and then they freeze children anyway, even though they are not supposed to be doing any of these evil, terrible things. What do we do then with those children? How do we properly love and care for them? What do we do? Again, 10 million such frozen children worldwide right now. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
iCatholic Mobile is a proud sponsor of the Station of the Cross. What if your phone bill did more than just connect calls? What if it connected souls? With iCatholic Mobile, every text, every call, and every gig of data supports the Station of the Cross, keeping Catholic programming on the air. Nationwide 5G, unlimited talk and text, reliable data, and free roaming in Canada and Mexico, all on a network that puts faith first. More info at iCatholicMobile.com.
Back to the Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Elizabeth Rex. She is a Catholic bioethicist and the president of the Donum Vitae Institute, donumvitaeinstitute.org. I want to read this bit from Dignitas Personae, again, 2008 document of the CDF under Pope Benedict XVI. It's quoting Pope St. John Paul II here in this passage, apparently from a symposium that he gave an address at. Evangelium Vitae and Law was the name of that symposium in 1996. Very interesting quote here. This is what the document says. It says, all things considered, it needs to be recognized that the thousands of abandoned embryos represent a situation of injustice, which in fact cannot be resolved. Therefore, John Paul II made an appeal to the conscience of the world's scientific authorities, and in particular to doctors, that the production of human embryos be halted, taking into account that there seems to be no morally licit solution regarding the human destiny of the thousands and thousands of frozen embryos which are and remain the subjects of essential rights and should therefore be protected by law as human persons. This caught my eye because this gets to what is my main point on any of this, which I'm kind of open to hearing the different sides of the debate here, as long as we're holding the principle of how do we best love the child that is already here, and then it's a question of various people with different views on that. But I think outside of that, though, I would say what I'm very firm on is that we have to end this. This should not be legal. This should not be allowed. IVF, just as abortion should not be legal, should not be allowed. And guess what? Constitutional personhood for the preborn ends it all. Right? If we could simply affirm that every human being is a human person from the moment of conception, fertilization, and that's when our unalienable rights begin, and persons are defined as having equal protection under the laws in the 14th Amendment, also having due process rights under the 14th Amendment and the 5th Amendment, constitutional personhood for the preborn. If we can get the Supreme Court to have to answer that question and rule on it, well, that solves the problem. It doesn't solve the problem of what do we do with all of the frozen human beings at an early stage of development, embryonic human beings that are frozen worldwide, 1.5 million in the U.S., 10 million worldwide. But my main point, again, we've got to end IVF. And then, yes, what are we going to do here? I think this is an interesting argument. I'm going to play a couple clips today. I think this is a good way to help just get both sides out and have an opportunity for Dr. Elizabeth Rex to basically speak to some of the common objections that are out there to embryo adoption. And this one I'm going to play. It's sort of along the lines of what I'm saying, but it takes it a little bit further. I don't agree with everything that just because I'm playing playing a clip of somebody here today. It doesn't mean I agree with everything of their view. I don't, but I actually think this is a pretty strong argument, this particular argument you're about to hear, that deserves an answer. I'm excited to hear how Dr. Rex is going to answer this so I can hear the other side of it. But this is Father Tad Pacholczyk from the National Catholic Bioethics Center, senior ethicist there. This was about 5 months ago. He was on the Conor Gallagher show. This is what he had to say. Here it is.
The most important question that's raised by this: how do we stop the assembly line?
Yes.
Because everyone's saying, let's talk about embryo adoption because we have all these leftover embryos and we should be able to implant them into women. And it's like, are you kidding me? Don't you see what that's going to do? That's going to say to the industry, all right, we need a two-tier system.
Wow.
One tier is we do IVF. You pay us, $12,000. We'll make you your own baby. Hey, if you only got 2,000, we have a bunch of spare embryos here. We've got them categorized. Some of them are this race or ethnicity. You tell us what you want. We'll pick it out. You get the product you want. Only 2,000, $2,000, we'll implant you. And then they'll be pressured to keep the stockpiles current. So this idea that by making embryo adoption licit, allowable, is going to solve the problem.
I never even thought about that.
It's all backwards.
It's feeding the machine.
It's feeding the machine, the monster. It's feeding the monster.
What you've done, if you implant these, then you've actually you've turned it into consumerism.
Yes, which it already is. IVF is a huge consumerist, massive industry.
It would skyrocket the demand if you started adopting these things off.
It would feed right into the continuity of this horrible practice of IVF.
All right, Dr. Elizabeth Rex, your thoughts on this, particularly the danger of there are well-meaning people that would like to rescue children via embryo adoption, but what about if this was further turned into a commoditization of the child embryo adoption, and people would rush into this, and this would become a big marketplace, big money, and then it would, without ending IVF, it would actually increase it all the more, and even more children would be created for this purpose. Is that a danger that you've thought of? What is your response to this?
That danger is non-existent. Sadly, I don't think Father Tad has adopted any children. My husband and I have adopted 2 children. We were very fortunate. They were newborns, 2 separate birth mothers and birth fathers. 98% of all unplanned pregnancies are aborted. Birth mothers don't want their children to be adopted. It takes a heroic, loving birth mother and birth father to make a truly courageous decision to go through 9 months of pregnancy and then transfer their baby to another couple. It is heroic. They are heroes. Likewise with IVF. I was going to mention, you mentioned all of the millions of embryos that are destroyed in the process of IVF and freezing. And it's true. And if there are about 2,000, I've heard just recently there could be as many as, 2 million frozen embryos. There could be as many as 4 or 5 million in the United States. That was from NCBC. Ted Furton just used the number of 4 million frozen embryos. I have read studies that when families have finished with their IVF and they have 15, 20, or just 5 leftover unused frozen embryos, and let's just say of the 2 million that might be in freezer right now, 59%, almost 60% of the parents will donate their embryos to research, destructive experimentation. They don't want their embryos to be adopted. And another 38%, almost 40%, will just discard them. Medical waste sent to the incinerator. It leaves about 3% of the leftover frozen embryos that a courageous and loving couple will say, I don't want to kill my embryos.
Do you know,
I'd rather donate them and let them be adopted by another couple. And then they can choose open adoption, a closed adoption, or even an anonymous adoption. Actually, I visited the National Embryo Donation Center firsthand just 2 weeks ago.
If I could just break in for a moment, just to sneak a question in, are you aware, is there any payment that occurs when parents who have frozen embryos, frozen children, when they give their children when they donate their children, you could say, I guess, to research purposes, do they get paid anything for that?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think so. You're not, it's really illegal to sell babies, buy them or sell them.
So that would be, again, that would be the concern, right? That if they were being paid for embryo adoption, that they would be likely to maybe do that. No?
No, when embryos are donated either to the National Embryo Donation Center, there's no payment, but there is a benefit. They don't have to keep paying $1,000 or more to fertility clinics, which is cooperation and evil, paying to keep their children frozen, which is intrinsically evil itself. And they are now released from any storage fees, and they are free to either choose a family. They will receive free counseling. They can match. They can indicate what kind of a family, religion, location. They are in control of their embryos.
Okay.
So they can decide which couple might adopt them or not.
Great. So then to Father Tad's point, it's illegal for anyone to get paid through embryo adoption. So therefore that would kind of prevent this further commoditization and this increasing the marketplace. That really wouldn't be an issue because it's illegal to sell those frozen embryos, correct?
That's right. And adoption, now the adoption process, so an adopting family, yes, will have expenses for the counseling, for the home study, for the criminal background check, for the financial verifications, all of that, plus just the counseling. At Snowflakes, which is out in California, that's an adoption agency. And anyone who's ever adopted a child knows that it's certainly less expensive than doing IVF, but still there are attorney fees, and some states require an attorney not only for the adopting parent, but for the placing family or mother or father. So I found out that at NEDC, the average cost to the adopting family is around $4,000. And it's Snowflakes, which I'm also in contact with, is about $9,000, almost double. So there are fees for adopting children, but it's certainly better than doing IVF. You're not doing IVF. You are the families who are placing, which are very few families. As I just mentioned, about 97% of the parents who have frozen embryos destroy them, their own children. And I also found out that at the National Embryo Donation Center, about half of the donors who are placing their embryos for adoption or donation want anonymity. They are donating their embryos anonymously. They don't want anyone to know. And that is almost like safe havens. If you know about the safe haven laws in all 50 states, better than finding a dead baby in a dumpster or drowned in a toilet. You can bring a baby anonymously to a hospital or to a fire station. As long as the baby's unharmed, you can just bring the baby, turn it in, no questions, no name, no blame, nothing. You just give the baby and it'll be instantly adopted. There's a long, long list. There's about 2 million couples waiting to adopt a newborn, but there are no newborns. You can wait anywhere from 2 to 10 years to adopt a newborn while a baby's aborted every, 20 seconds. So the same thing occurs with frozen embryos. The parents really don't want their children to be adopted. Sadly, adoption is not promoted by the pro-life movement really the way we should. They're heroes when they choose life and consider adoption for an unplanned baby or for an unwanted embryo. They are really being heroic, and the baby's life will be saved by a loving adoptive family.
Yes, Dr. Elizabeth Rex is with us, and we're going to get to more. What is there a distinction? And is there a meaningful distinction? What is it between regular adoption, as we would understand it, of a born child versus adopting a child that is at an earlier stage of development, an embryonic stage of development, adopting that child? Is it the same exact thing? Are there differences? What's the distinction? We're going to be back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Elizabeth Rex, a Catholic bioethicist and the president of the Donum Vitae Institute, donumvitaeinstitute.org. Let us keep in mind as we go about this show today, those who are struggling with infertility, and found this little prayer. Maybe we can just say a prayer for them together now, and we do pray that they will find the right way forward to handle to carry the cross that they've been given. It is a very difficult cross to be able to unite themselves with Jesus and offer themselves and be able to suffer well as they are called to. And so let us pray. God of all life, you fill what is empty. You make abundant what is scarce. You bring to bloom what is barren. We ask your presence and care for all those who seek to be parents. Bless them with the conception, healthy delivery, and joyful rearing of children to cherish, made in your image and likeness. Dwell with them and console them as they wait for the gifts given in your good time. With Sarah and Abraham, Rachel and Jacob, Hannah and Elkanah, Zechariah and Elizabeth, we pray, amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. And adoption is such a beautiful thing when done well. A child, an innocent child whose mother may be unable to care for them, that father may not even be around at all, and yet that mother is able to place the child in the hands of another family that has their arms wide open to receive the child with great love into their family and raise and care for the child. How beautiful that is. And so, of course, we want to affirm adoption. And to Dr. Rex's point, the pro-life movement maybe doesn't do enough to promote adoption. We can always do more, and we ought to. And how is embryo adoption similar, different? How are we to think about embryo adoption with respect to thinking about our littlest brothers and sisters in the earliest stages of development, frozen by the millions in our nation and around the world because of IVF? How are we to think about this practice of embryo adoption equated to regular adoption? Well, I want to play this clip as a way to get the discussion going and get Dr. Rex's thoughts on this. I found this. This is Matt Fradd's show, and this is him with guest Stephanie Gray Connors, who has written a very good book about IVF, Conceived by Science, Thinking Carefully and Compassionately About Infertility and IVF. I do recommend this book as a good one. She was on the show, and the topic came up about embryo adoption. It seemed Matt hadn't thought much about it, but he did have some pretty strong feelings when it came up about what his sense of it was. You're going to see that in this clip. And they do get into a distinction here about embryo adoption versus regular adoption and what the nature of that might be. We'll get Dr. Rex's thoughts on the other side. Here it is.
Let's insert them into the bodies of whoever will volunteer to be candidates for embryo adoption. So that they
say that does not pass the smell test for me.
It doesn't sound right. Yeah, when you start to
when you start to just explain, you know how there are certain things that just seem wrong, and you don't need a study and you don't need an argument.
Yeah.
You might be able to convince me, but right now I'm really just opposed to this idea.
So I will say that I have gone back and forth, and I still have a hard time landing one way or the other, which is why the appendix in my book answers the question, what to do with frozen embryos, by basically presenting both sides and then not really giving an answer. Mm-hmm. But I lean against it now. I lean that way. The alternative perspective is to say, although the sin was creating life in a lab, some argue that the fertilization of life is so closely connected to the gestation of life that to have someone else's child in my womb seems to somehow be wrong. In the same way as we were talking earlier, like if morally speaking, the only child that should come into existence in my body is that created between me and my husband through sexual intimacy, that if I adopt a frozen embryo, there's now someone in my body who's not my husband's and my child. And through sexual intimacy, that never could have happened morally, because that would have I would have had sex with someone outside of marriage. So therefore, some people would say that just doesn't sit right. So some would say we should keep them frozen until the second coming. And then when we all die, then they die then and go to heaven. Some people would say there is no ethical way to continue to care for them. So because it would be disproportionate and extraordinary to keep humans in freezers, an inability to carry on their life means that we can almost like unplug and withdraw support. And as they thaw, we pour holy water, baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, and give them the respectful burial that they are due. Some people are like, well, that doesn't sound good. And the analogy I use is to help people see, well, it doesn't sound good, but it could still be
That makes
justified.
sense to me. I'm with that.
That
one.
does make sense. Yeah.
As someone who's not thought all this through, I'm with that one. I'm not with planting embryos and adopting them in that sense. I am okay with pulling the plug and baptizing them.
Right, because the argument being it's extraordinary to keep humans alive this way, because humans weren't meant to be in freezers. They were meant to be in not just not just any uterus, but the uterus of their mother. So all my children can claim a right to my uterus because it exists for my offspring more than it exists for me.
Okay, so what about that distinction about the actual child being inserted into the woman's body in a way that it would somehow, as some would say, do something against the integrity of the marital act, the sacrament of marriage in some way? There'd be some type of a violation in this. So your thoughts on that, and also the idea that they bring forward that they seem to like more, which would be to say this is extraordinary means of keeping them alive, and that it actually would be morally illicit, and maybe the right approach is their argument here is to actually pull the plug and remove the extraordinary means, allowing them to naturally die and then give them a dignified burial. Your thoughts on this?
Oh, you've got a lot of questions in there. I've seen this interview before, and I would just like to remind all of us that every embryo received is directly created by God and in his image. And God is our common father. Our soul comes from God. It does not come from our parents. God loves that child, whether it's a little boy or a little girl, no matter how it was conceived, in rape, in adultery, or in vitro. That is a child of God. And that child has inalienable God-given rights to life, and it may not be deprived of implantation and gestation. And that is the teaching of the Catholic Church. So the options are either for the mother and father to raise the child themselves or place the child for adoption. There is no right to kill an embryo or a fetus or a newborn. The only choice is life. And when, again, I'm not sure if either one, Matt Fradd or Stephanie, I think it's Stephanie, right? Mm-hmm. Have adopted. But when you adopt a child, you are the mother and the father. The parental rights of the birth parents or the genetic parents are terminated. And that's done by a judge. That's the way it should be done. Now, embryo adoption is something so new and so unusual. It confuses a lot of people. And we have to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a simple way of saying that child has a right to life. And it's interesting, you mentioned a quote before from John Paul II, and I'd like to respond to that quote where it says, "It seems that there is no licit solution, even though the child has inalienable rights that must be respected, and we have a duty to resolve this." That statement was actually, if you look at the footnote, was stated in May 24th. I know the date because it's my son's birthday. May 24th, 1996. And embryo adoption had not happened. The very first adopted frozen embryo was not born until December 31st, 1998. So from May to December, it's going on 3 years before embryo adoption had even happened. No one could even imagine that you could adopt some of these frozen embryos. It was unheard of. In fact, today it's unheard of. Many people have never heard of it. And that's why they do IVF, when they could be adopting these frozen embryos for a lot less, and they're already children in existence. So these are children of God, and we need to treat them like the least of our brethren. And what we do to them, we do to Jesus. We know that we will be judged. What if we feed them, give them drink, shelter? They're strangers, whether we welcome them, they're in prison and we go to visit them and rescue them. What we do or do not do to these embryos, we do or do not do to Jesus. So they're a very strong argument. And I'm sure,
to be fair, that Matt and Stephanie would 100% agree with you on that. So nobody is questioning the fact of whether these are children made in the image and likeness of God. I think, again, that's how we framed it from the beginning. Everybody, I think, agrees on that. That's not the debate. The debate is, how do we best love these children that are in a very precarious situation and is a very difficult situation to really come up with some sort of a solution. You acknowledge there is a difficulty, at least in looking at saying, well, there is a difference from just regular adoption in that the child has to be inserted into the mother's womb, and this is going to be something that I guess others have raised this, other ethicists. I don't really know the answer to it, but saying that this could violate something with respect to the marital act and the church's teaching on the procreative meaning of marriage. You think, no way, that doesn't violate it in any way, no problem here.
What the church condemns is heterologous fertilization. That is what makes a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, a mother and a father, not through each other. It's the husband and wife who use donor eggs or donor sperm who violate their marriage. There's where the adultery happens, where the child is not the son or daughter of both of its married parents. There's an intrusion of someone outside of the marriage.
Right, of course.
So the marriage is violated when a couple uses donor eggs or sperm.
Right.
And even if it's the husband's sperm and they don't have the marital act, they are the ones who are violating procreation. Right. It is not the adoptive parents.
Yeah, I'm just asking. I'm just asking about that situation, not the other ones. Again, I agree. It's clear in church teaching. But we're talking about this one where it's an open question, just trying to figure it out. What about the extraordinary circumstances of care? For instance, if somebody is of old age dying and it's extraordinary care, right? And it's keeping them alive. It is licit. It is permissible. It is even what might be the greatest good to allow that person to die naturally. So the church does teach that. So what would be your answer to that?
The church very clearly says parents do not have the right to dispose of the life of their unborn child. So there are other options.
This wouldn't be parents doing it.
The parents are the ones who make the decision.
Well, a lot of parents
they are the ones to either...
A lot of parents aren't even able to find their children anymore. My understanding is many of them are even lost and just kind of out there. So the question is, what do we do? Again, for these children, the parents they've already made their decision. They've done the wrong thing. They've gone down the road of IVF and they've created these children in this way. And now these children are sitting there frozen. They've already made that decision. Many of them just leave them and go away, or they get lost to them. So the parents aren't going to make the decision. So again, just something to consider. I think these are fair points to raise and discuss. Again, there's no definitive church answer on either side that has been authoritatively proclaimed at this point. Maybe there will be at some point, but it isn't here today. And so, again, we're just trying to flesh out the debate, get both sides, and we'll be back with more from Dr. Elizabeth Rex. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Elizabeth Rex, Catholic bioethicist and the president of the Donum Vitae Institute, donumvitaeinstitute.org. All right, just one more clip today to address, and this is Dr. Joseph Meany. He's a senior fellow also of the National Catholic Bioethics Center. He was on last month, shared his personal testimony and got into some of his work. I happened to ask him about this controversial question. Where does he stand on it? This is what he had to say. Here it is.
My personal inclination is to see that if a couple has, and they've repented obviously of having done IVF, but because they did IVF, they have a bunch of embryos that are in cold storage that are cryopreserved in liquid nitrogen. If at all possible, I think they should try to rescue their own children. But sometimes, the couple has gone beyond reproductive age and it's no longer possible for them to do that. They would not have a moral responsibility. One never has a moral responsibility to do something that's impossible. But I think that if it is possible for them to do it, that they should. My major concern with embryo adoption, certainly it's a very pro-life thing. And I think from a strictly pro-life perspective, it makes a lot of sense. But from the perspective of Catholic sacramental theology, the theology of marriage, I think there is a problem with the wife becoming pregnant without the husband. So, pregnant with a child that is not the husband's child, maybe not even her own child. There seems to be something about the marital covenant that one would only be pregnant through one's spouse. And that's really the difference between a prenatal adoption and a postnatal one. Because once the child is born, there's clearly nothing that goes against the theology of marriage to adopt that child. But before, becoming pregnant is not, just gestation. It's not just, a location. It's a very profound link between the woman and the child who should be her child. But at the same time, I certainly see the pro-life arguments. I mean, what are we going to do? And in fact, even if prenatal adoption did happen, it does happen, right? There are a number of agencies that make it happen that are mostly run by evangelical Protestants. But the problem is, of course, that there are millions of frozen embryos out there, and millions, are not going to be adopted. So I don't think it's going to be a practical solution just on the very, very practical level. We need to stop producing so many children and freezing them. That is the bottom line. And that is certainly what St. John Paul II called for internationally, says, made a huge appeal, says, please stop doing this.
All right, so there's Dr. Joseph Meany. He takes kind of a more nuanced middle ground approach here. He does land where we all land, which is to say that IVF ought to be illegal. And this is something that, again, Pope St. John Paul II has said, as well as the Catholic Church teaching all along the line here. And so that's clear. But what do we do with the children that are already here, already frozen due to IVF? And he says, look, if they're your children, you ought to think about adopting them. If you can rescue them and adopt them, then that's what you maybe ought to do. So he's saying that would be a very good thing. But then that's where he stops short, and he has some reasons why he doesn't think that adoption outside of the parents' own children would be maybe a good thing or even a right thing. And then how do we deal with the problem? It's still going to exist because there are still so many more children than could possibly be adopted. So a lot there, but Dr. Rex, your thoughts?
Okay, we've got a lot of topics here. Dr. Joseph Meany is a friend of mine. I know him well. We've discussed this topic together many times, actually. So, yeah, it's bewildering to a lot of us. But I focus on the teachings of the Catholic Church. And I will begin by saying that it is not according to the Catholic moral tradition of the Catholic Church to expose to death children created in vitro. So once they have been conceived, the only option is life. And the appropriate thing to do would be for the parents who did IVF. If you do IVF, you must transfer your children. They are your children, and you are responsible for them. And so not all of them are going to survive the freezing. In the case of the very first adopted frozen embryo, the couple who adopted 20 frozen embryos, and they were their children. They're not placing a baby in the womb that is not their baby, their son, their daughter. They have been chosen to accept these embryos and be their adopted parents. The placing family is no longer the parents of those 20 frozen embryos. So the baby that is placed in the mother's womb, where the baby belongs and must be transferred, there's no option. If you just do IVF and then don't transfer the baby, that's an abortion. To prevent implantation, to prevent pregnancy. The word pregnancy is troubling because we need to use fertilization-based definitions, not implantation-based definitions. That's what Planned Parenthood does. That's what Guttmacher Institute does. It's not a baby. You're not pregnant until the baby implants. So if you terminate the baby's life before implantation, you're just preventing pregnancy, not killing a baby. It's very important to understand how they manipulate the language and definitions. So impregnation versus implantation. Impregnation sounds like making pregnant, but it actually, the medical definition is to fertilize or to inseminate, which is where conception, fertilization takes place, is at the moment the sperm and the egg fuse. Now the man and the woman are a mother and a father. It's not when the baby implants. The problem is that they've done artificial procreation. The baby's outside of the womb where it should not be, or it's in the freezer where it does not belong. It belongs in the mother's womb. And that's option number one, definitely. But if for whatever reason that option is not possible, then the only other option that's moral is adoption. The only moral option for an orphan. You were saying the parents aren't around. They're gone. You can't find them. Even Pope Benedict says that. The CDF says that. They're orphans. The parents can't be found. That means they're orphans. What do we do with orphans? We don't kill them. We don't put them outside and say you're on your own. No, the government really should be responsible for making sure that every single one of those children, unborn children outside of the womb, the Alabama Supreme Court made a landmark historic decision when it ruled that the embryos that were tragically killed, wrongful death in Alabama, the parents could sue for wrongful death of a minor because they are unborn children outside of the womb. And all chaos broke out. It was right before the election, and everyone didn't know how to handle it. We were not ready for that decision, but that's the truth. Doesn't matter where the baby is, inside the womb or outside of the womb, it's a child. So the only options are parenthood, bring up the baby yourself, or place the baby for adoption.
All right, Dr. Elizabeth Rex, you have a couple books. Can you share what you have with us today?
I do. I have a handbook on the moral arguments in the embryo adoption debate, both sides, articles from the National Catholic Bioethics Center. I love this book. It's like a little catechism. What does the Catholic Church teach? Frequently asked questions. It's questions and answers. It's a little easier to understand. And even the zygote of Christ. Jesus was a zygote. And Mary was a zygote. The Incarnation and the Immaculate Conception teaches us a lot about our own conception, where God creates our soul and our parents contribute our human nature. And that's the beauty of God's